Hello everybody, this is the Web Search Part 3 video where I want to look at web search setting files, resource files, and how we can clone, export and import them. So if we go to MemoQ, what we've been using up to now to look at the web search files has been to go to Options, and then Default Resources. We've come over here to click on Web Search, and we can see the different options we have in our default resources for web search. Now it's also possible to look at default resources in a project home settings. And here we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 settings, including QA settings. But if you notice, we don't have web settings. So we can use the settings in a project to set up various default resources, but we can't use this for web settings, which is why we've been using the options. Another possibility, I'll just put the text back for later when we use it. Another possibility is to go to here, which is the resource console. Now the resource console will show us all of our settings for all the resources. These are all the resources that we can have in MemoQ. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 21 if we include machine translation settings. I'm not sure whether they truly are settings that are a resource or a plugin, but never mind. Now, the first 4 resources, translation memories, term bases, live docs and users, can be very, very large files. As we know, a translation memory, a term base can be huge. It can occupy hundreds of megabytes or more than a gigabyte. These are called heavy resources. Heavy because the files can be heavy. There can be a lot of data in them. The other resources are called light resources because these tend to be configuration settings files where the actual size of the file is quite small. Let's go back to what we saw in the first computer assisted translation course. Was when we looked at QA settings, we were able to come here and edit the file, but not if it was a default file. We had to make a copy. We saw that in the previous video. Now let's go back to the web search settings. These are all the things we can do with the settings files for light resources. We can make a new one. We can delete a file, we can edit, we can see the properties, which just tends to be the name and whether it's read-only or not. Now the 2 I want to look at are export and import. So let's take web search settings copy, for example. If I click on export, I can actually save this file. I click on Web Search Settings, Copy, and it makes a file called an MQRES file. That's MemoQ Resource File. So let me just save this. Now I can open this up in a text editor. So let me take a text editor and open this file. And I'm in a different place. So which one was it? It was the Web Search Settings copy. So this is the MQRES file. And if I click on it and open it up, I can see the file in my text editor. And there's some information at the start. It's a Web Search version 1 resource. There's some code here. It's actually an XML file, if we note. And it goes blah, blah, blah. And here we have the name of the first link and the search string. And we come down and we see the name of the next one, the string, and so on. So even though we may not understand all the code here, we can see it's basically a data file for the web search search providers, the name, the address, and some other information. Let's go back to MemoQ. Now, we can export the file as we just saw. Why would we do that? Well, we could then send it to somebody else and they could use it. Imagine you sent an MQRES file by email to somebody and they, let's simulate that. So they got the file. There are actually some sample files in Moodle. What I've done is put in our material this week, I've put something called sample MQRES files from Kevin Losner. So let's take one of these, for example. Let's take this one then. So I'm downloading this like I download any file, and I can save it. Now I can come back to MemoQ, and I'm going to import a new web search settings file. So here we are. Here's one I just downloaded. I just click on it and I open it up. MemoQ shows me what the name is, and I say OK. So it's example DEPT search. So we've got one or two things here. So I click on OK. I'm just going to put search 2. And now I've got search 2 here. I did actually do this before. I should have taken this away, my apologies. This is what we downloaded just now. So we can open it up and have a look at it. Here are some links. Now, I could actually add another link, as we saw. And I could test it and then add it. And I could go through making a lot of useful links for German PT. And then I could test it. So this is how we can understand that all these light resources have, well, so if you've got something, they have all these files that can be exported and imported. They're doing very different things, but the basic principle is you can export and import them. So we can take a file, export it, share it with a colleague, and then we can import it. And once it's imported, we could select it to be used, although it wouldn't be very good to use in an EN Portuguese. And we can work on it. So basically, these resource files are files that can be saved on a computer, shared, opened, and then they can be modified. The final thing to say is that when we make server projects, we can add, for example, a QA settings file, a web search settings file. And when we download the part of the project that's our work, such as some translation files or some files to revise. We may also, in the project, have a QA settings file or a web search settings file that gets downloaded. That's the end of the third video